Managing subscriptions. So in this video, I will be discussing managing subscriptions on Microsoft Windows Azure platform. We will talk about how to assign administrator permissions. We'll talk about the cost center and tagging, managing policy by PowerShell and command line interface, and finally talk about Azure policy. In the past, in the previous versions of Microsoft Azure certifications, subscriptions were not a part of certification and they were just informative. But for AZ100, subscriptions are also a part of certification, and as it becomes more important on how to manage a subscription and manage the budget for that, Microsoft is putting more emphasis on how to subscribe different services in Microsoft Windows Azure. So let's log into the Azure and land on the dashboard. Before I move further, I have to remind you that there is a setting that you can decide where you're going to land on, and Azure usually asks you if you want to be at home, which actually has a description about all the services that you're looking at, the dashboard, which is specific to the service and a specific services you use, and you can see all services. So for the sake of adding a user with the administrative privileges or any type of privileges, you need to go to all services, these three dots over here. And then as you can see, subscriptions are right over here. So we click on subscriptions and you can see all the subscriptions you have. In this case, I'm using the free trial subscription, which is already expired. Since that 30 days is gone. And remember, when you have a free subscription, you can hold on to that subscription as long as you have the account. However, some services may not be available to you anymore. Microsoft is going to ask you to go for pay-as-you-go. That is your choice. I usually don't recommend people to activate pay-as-you-go unless they really want to use services that are paid services on Microsoft Azure. Anyway, I'm gonna click on my free trial over here, and from here, as you can see on the left side, you have some options. So for the sake of this specific one, I want to go to the access control or IAM. Before I click on that, notice that Microsoft is telling me that my credit has expired and is asking me to upgrade to pay-as-you-go over here. You can do that through going to your account and updating your account. However, that's not a matter of this video, so I'm going back to Access Control IAM, click on IAM, and over here you can see a list of all the accesses that I have. So in order to add someone to this Microsoft Azure instance, I need to go to the Add Role Assignment. Remember, the reason that you're adding someone could be anything from changing the ownership of this Microsoft Azure instance all the way to adding a collaborator or another administrator or another person to be in your entity. However, click on Add, and then here you can add a new user. First of all, notice that the only user right now is myself with my Outlook email. So I'm going to go ahead and choose another owner per se, and of course it should be the Azure Active Directory user. I'm gonna select let's say the other account of mine, which is a.kararudi at ccsf.edu, and then I can add that person over here. What to notice is Azure already is telling me that an email is going to be sent out to this account for this person to be aware of. He is getting added, which in this case I don't care, that's me, so I just clicked on it. Now I have this user added. I click on Save. As you can see, the invitation is being sent to the user, and that's pretty much all I need to do. Remember, the user is invited, but Azure was unable to add user to the list of my users. The reason being is this person has not received, oh actually I have this over here that I can show you right away. So as you can see, this invitation is sent to my account right now through Microsoft Azure, and I just need to click on get started and get added over here. So that adds here. The reason that you saw that error was because it is not still added. So it's telling me that, yeah, the user is listed over here, but he has not accepted the invitation and therefore is not a member. So I can easily go and click on that user again to see the user, and I can click on remove if I want to remove the user. So as you can see, it's pretty straightforward on how to add someone to this specific instance of Azure. Of course, like what you do in Microsoft Active Directory, you can manage user over here. You can change and assign different roles to different users, deny assignments, permissions, and all that, which we're going to discuss that later down the road when we talk about the Azure security. As of now, that was the goal, to add a user as an owner or administrator, which we did. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and remove this user because I don't want to mix them up. Okay. So as you can see, the user is gone, and the only user right now is going to be myself. I can remove this user, yes, but then it's going to recreate the user automatically, as it is the only sole user of the Azure instance right now. Okay, now let's talk about the pricing. So when you want to talk about the pricing, now let me take you back to all services. So we start from the go and close this guy. So when you are on the all services, you see that you have this cost management plus billing, that when you click on it, you can see all the billing attributes of your Azure instance. Right now, Azure is telling me that there are no billings to be shown because I'm not paying, and I'm not a pay-as-you-go person right now on the Microsoft Azure. However, my information is right over here. You can see the total billing months and everything. Recent billing history, nothing is there. And my free trial, if I click on that, I can see how much I actually got charged by Microsoft Azure. So out of the $200, I only used 18.44, which is for installation of the Microsoft Server 2016 data center, and 9 cents for the amount of time that data center was running. If you click on this, you're going to get a detailed information about how you actually got charged. Let's review that. As you can see, I have a disk charge, which basically is the source charge for this 2016 server OS disk, which is 18.44. So right here, if I already own a certificate and a license with 2016 server, this charge is going to get waived, and I'm not going to get charged for using that disk resource. Then, as you can see, that's a premium SSD hard drive that is assigned to me, which is included in that price. Which again, you can downgrade this if you don't like to spend $18 for the SSD rental, and you can get an HDD or something in that area. Then, as you can see, we have 9-cent charges for using a virtual machine. So this Microsoft Windows Server was installed as a virtual machine, as I described and explained before. And Azure is charging me for this virtual machine. This is the name that I assigned to the virtual machine. So data transfer in is 0 because I didn't send anything up to it. And data transfer out is absolutely free under this certificate, under the subscription that I have here, which is a free subscription of the Azure. And remember, that is free for the entire 12 month, which almost 1.5 of it is gone. After that, you're going to have some fees for data transfer out too. So they charge you for traffic, which transfer in is usually more expensive than transfer out, which is good actually if you're hosting a server or a web server on this 2016 server. Then you're not going to pay that much money for users to look at your information. And then I have total charge of 9 cents for as much as I have worked over there. As you can see, I had a storage account which automatically is added to this server, And this storage account has incurred me $0 of charge because I really didn't store anything over there. But as you can see, every activity like listing and creating the container operations, write, read, and all that is listed here, and I'm not charged for it because again, a free account is here. But in the long run, you have to put into consideration that every time a read or write or any type of activity happens to a storage account, you may get charged based on the type of subscription that you have with them. So you also can get the cost by service reports over here. You can choose your service over here. This is the only service that I have. The resource type, I already selected all of them in here. Let's say I just want to see how much my virtual machine cost me. And then I click on virtual machine. The group, you can see if you want the test VM for CCSF group, which I already grouped everything under that name, or you want all the virtual machines from different groups. So that's your choice. When you have more services, this list, of course, are going to be more exhaustive. And then you decide what is the time span, and I'm going to choose the last 90 days. And then if there is any tag. So right now I have no tags associated with my costs, but you can associate different tags with your costs. Let's say you're working for an enterprise that is developing different softwares, and therefore you have different software development groups, such as a group that is working on the back end, a group that is working on the front end, and all that. And that means that every single one of those teams is actually accessing the resources in different times and work on resources in a different manner. In project management, one of the principles is the cost management, and usually they want to have the costs associated with WBS or work breakdown structures or work groups within the company. And this is going to help you to tag these specific groups with different labels and tags there, and be able to run reports over them. Right now I have no tags, so that is going to stay there, and I'm going to click on apply. And as you can see now, report is getting presented for that amount of time. Of course, it's not going to change that much. This was the Azure instance that I created for this class only, and however, you have to have it in mind that this is not the monthly charge that Azure charged me for the services and resources that I had. So let's take a look at the monthly charge for the past 30 days. And you can see the charge is actually $16.19 for the amount of services that I have. And the number 18 that you see over there is because I have the service for somewhat over than 30 days, which was actually kind of like December, if I'm not mistaken, that I created this account, and now it's accumulating on there. It is not gonna charge me anymore. As you noticed, I don't have this account activated anymore, therefore I don't have access to that server. If I go there and try to start the server, it's gonna ask me to activate the pay-as-you-go account or any different type of accounts over there. Going back to the current period, for the current period, which is the full month, I'm getting that 18.53. And if you're interested in looking at the details of every single one of these services, just simply click on those services, and it's going to take you to the details of how usage has happened, and clicking here you actually can sort them based on that. Anyway, when you get more resources, it becomes more important how you actually setting up your subscriptions and the billing periods, especially how to tag them. But one could think, is there any specific way to add the tags to services for different departments within the company or not? Which the answer, unfortunately, is no. You need to ask every department to tag their own services or whatever instance they create or use, so that you can run the reports. Or you can have a system that one administrator actually creates all those tags and add those to the different services that people within your company are using. which defeats the purpose. To be honest, you're doing cloud so that you have most of the stuff happen in a self-service fashion. And if you want to have an admin within the company take care of those small administrative activities, then you basically are kind of like going back closer to the traditional way of computing, which is the local server or cluster computing. Let's take a look and see how those tags could be changed. So if I go to all resources over here, I can see all the resources that I own already. And of course, in an enterprise or a bigger company, it's going to be an exhaustive list over here. Just simply choose any resources that you want. For example, the server virtual machine. And when you come to the properties of that server virtual machine, you can actually see the tags over here. I can click here and add any type of tag that I want. Usually companies create their own tag schema. It always helps to have a naming schema for the tags and set the tag and a value for that. For example, I can set this tag to my VM servers and the value be server 01 and then go from there. So that's pretty much the thing that you can do for any specific resource that you have. And of course, I don't save it over here. You can have it for any server that you have, and you can go from there and create the specific reports that you need on the billing cycles. Of course, another way of managing your company or intercompany resource consumption values is to ask every department to have their own subscription to Azure. And then they pay through the subscriptions, and you can have billing under control. It depends on the situation of the company and how you want to manage it. However, whichever route you take, it is kind of critical to have a full control over what Azure is actually charging you and how you can save more money and manage your budget better when it comes to cloud resource consumption. The other thing that I want to talk about here right now about tagging is if I go to home and then type policy here and go to the policy page. Remember that I don't have any policies active over here as this is just a test account, but I'm able to add a tagging policy and make sure I actually am applying tagging mandation to all the resource group users. So of course I have this free trial subscription over here, which is in the scope. And for the resource group, I can choose the resource group that I have, which is the test VM for CCSF. I'll select this, and now coming back here, I'm able to generate a policy for this specific account. In order to do so, I'll go here on the assignment, click, and then from this policy assignment pane, I can either assign initiative or I can assign a specific policy to the resource. For the sake of this part of the lecture, let's click on the assign policy, and you can see the scope of this policy is going to be my free trial with test VM for CCSF. You can change that to anything. It can be just a corner of your Active Directory or entire company. Let's go down here to the policy definition, and if you click on these three dots over here, you basically are going to be able to choose among the available policies in Microsoft Azure. Let's filter by tag, and as you can see, you can either enforce tags and values, apply tag and its default value, apply tag and its default value to resource groups, or enforce tag and their values on resource groups. So these policies work like the policies that you are familiar with from the Active Directory of Microsoft Windows Server. You just need to choose the policy, select it, and then as you can see, it's going to get automatically applied to this policy. I always ask people to put a description because of the fact that throughout the time when you grow on the resources and grow on the policies and settings that you create within the Azure instance, the only thing that can save you is the inline documentation, and this is what I refer to as inline documentation. Make them detailed and make them lifesavers as they should be for you within your administrative job. So every now and then in this course, we'll be talking about using PowerShell and the Bash, which is the CLI, to do the same exact things that we do through the graphical user interface. So to have you guys up to date on those. And here, for the rest of this video, I want to guide you through the documentation that you can use in order to successfully manage your instances through PowerShell, Cloud Shell, or Bash. You need to be on the Azure documentation page and go to the governance, and under the governance look for policy, which comes under the management groups. So I'll click on the policy and get here to what is the Azure policy. You're going to have some information about the Azure policies for sure, but what I want you to look for is how to assign a policy in PowerShell and how to assign a policy in Azure CLI. Of course, there are references to both of these in your textbook, but since within Azure everything changes almost every other month, I want you to know how to navigate through the documentation in order to get the new updates for yourself. So coming here, clicking on the PowerShell, you're going to see how to create the PowerShell or Cloud Shell for yourself. One thing to remember is when you are on the Microsoft Azure portal, you have this greater than sign up here, which actually is going to pull up your Cloud Shell. If it is your first time to use the Cloud Shell, you need to set up your Cloud Shell either using Bash or PowerShell. Doesn't matter, because later from the menus you can easily switch between these two. However, you need to have an active account in order to create those and go from there. There are two full documentations, which each of them takes like 3 minutes to read, and you just need to copy paste the commands that are listed here for you. Read the prerequisites, clean and quick. You actually should be meeting all those as if you have gone through all the steps of the previous video. We actually set up the PowerShell to work for Microsoft Azure, and then here's the command that you need to run in order to enable Microsoft Azure remote policy change management, and then finally you can create any policy. So the steps are very simple. First, through this command you create and enable the remote policies, and then here you have the specific policies created and posted there. Read the arguments, choose the specific policy that you want to apply. Remember, that policy should exist on Microsoft Azure portal. If you don't have that policy over there, you're going to get an error over here. Doing it through the PowerShell is much simpler than doing it through the CLI. And the CLI, you want to look at the JSON and everything. But anyway, even here you can see the JSON code. For those of you who are not very familiar with coding and are not interested, you don't worry about this. This is just to show you what the code is, just in case you want to use the code, but there is no need there is no need of using code if you just want to apply a policy. And then you click here on the Azure CLI, you're going to see the necessary commands for the CLI. Again, here, same story, you need to prepare the Azure. Remember, if you already have prepared the Azure for the PowerShell, you really don't need to go through this step. However, step 1 and then step 2, prepare the shell, apply the policy, and that's pretty much all you do. After you finish that, you can go back to your Azure instance and basically go to the policies and see if the policy that you applied is applied over there or not. Simple stuff, very straightforward. As I have said before, learning Microsoft Azure is just getting acquainted to an interface. And for those of you who are very familiar with Microsoft Windows Server, it should not be a big deal to become an Azure administrator. So we discussed how to add the tagging policy to the Microsoft Azure instances. However, policies have a use really beyond just adding a tagging enforcement to our instances. Basically, you define Azure policies to enforce company standards and service level agreements on that specific account that you have with the Azure. There are some built-in Azure policies like require SQL Server 12.0, allow storage account SKUs, allow resource types, locations, and so on, so on, so on. That through these policies, you can make sure a specific requirement is being met within your Microsoft Azure instance. For example, if you have applications and codes that should run on a specific version of a virtual machine, you can add that policy and make sure none of your teams is going to create a non-compliant virtual machine with that requirement. Or you can allow different type of resources or decide which locations your information is actually being stored into the servers on, and that can help with some of the security concerns and geographical concerns that companies may have. You can use SKUs for virtual machines, storage units, and so on and so on, so that you can track those resources through a standardized number system within your system. You can also apply different tags and make it a policy as we just discussed it, so nobody can have a resource working without a tag or a resource that is not traceable. So let's take a look at the policies within the Azure portal and go from there. So what I need to do is going back to home and look for policy and get myself to the policy page. And as you can see, the policies that we generated in our previous videos, as we deleted, those are not here anymore. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the assignment. And from the assignment, I'm going to go and click on the assign policy. And the first thing that we need to talk about here is the scope of the policy. So let's say I'm coming here to the scope. So I have been working on the entire scope of my subscription, which is named free trial subscription, during the last videos. But you can choose any other scope if you want through choosing a specific resource group. Right now, the only server that I have installed is this one, but if you have multiple servers over here, you can choose which one is going to be a part of your scope. And that's how you define the scope. Remember, it's very important to make sure the policies are applied to the right scope. One of the pitfalls that I have noticed a lot of administrators go down for is because they create the policies without thinking it through about why and how this policy should be applied. And then down the road, after having multiple policies, it is very confusing to see why something is not working or is working. So it is always the best to make sure you have selected the correct and the right scope for each of the policies. So when you have more than one resource group, you can exclude specific resources from this policy. In the case of ours, we only have one resource group, which is the test VM for CCSF. Therefore, you see, I can go down here and go for specific sub-resources to the 2000 server and exclude them. Let's say if I don't want this policy to be applicable to my drive, to the disk, I can simply choose it over here. For the sake of practice only, I'm going to let it be there. And you can also add to the selected scope if you have something that you want to add. So let's click on save. And now I have my scope defined and I have my exclusions defined. So next step will be adding the actual policy, which is going to be under the basics. So I click here, and it's going to list all the available definitions for me. And surprisingly, it looks like they're adding policies. A couple of days ago, I was here and they were at 129 or something like that, and now they're at 145. So the good news is Microsoft Azure is constantly getting developed and improved by Microsoft engineers. So you can either go through the custom ones that you can create or the built-in ones, or just see them all together. We will discuss how to create a custom policy very soon. For now, I'm going to leave it as it is, and we are going to just go down the list pretty quick and look at the different categories. As you can see, we have some audit policies that come built in, which are very useful actually when you have a resource that is being used by a lot of different people. You have deployment policies, you have log analysis policies, tag policies, and so on, so on, so on. And as I just said, visit here more often because, of course, you see they're growing it up. So always filter for the one that you're looking for. At this point, I would like to search for one policy. So I like to put audit here. And as you can see, most of the audit policy ones are going to come out. And oh, this one I actually like this. Audit VMs that do not manage disks. So if I just click on it and select it, it's going to get added over here. And basically what it does is any of the computers or virtual machines within that scope which do not manage the disks are going to go to a compliance report. And as an administrator, I can revisit that report and go back to those individual functional units and ask them why they're not in compliance with our policy and why they don't manage the disks. There are other policies that I can choose from this list that basically either restrict something so they don't let something happen, enforce something, they require something to happen, or audit something, which in this case we check the audit ones. Amazingly, as you can see, 106 policy out of the 145 policies are the audit policies. So the rest of the policies just sit at almost like 39 policies, which we're going to go through a couple of those just for the sake of visiting them. So this time I want to look for the enforce ones. So yeah, as you can see, you can enforce the tags and values. You can enforce automatic updates. Let's just choose this for the sake of it. And right now, any computer, any VM within this scope must upgrade with the app health checks on the virtual machines. And this doesn't enforces the update. There's not going to be no choice for the people who don't have enough administrative privileges to change this, which hopefully is going to be everybody within the system. Let's take a look at another policy here. So we can also look based on the product. Let's go for SQL. You can deploy threat detection on SQL servers or require SQL Server version 12 or anything like that. So it is very helpful to search based on the product every now and then if you need something to happen over there. Because look at this. At this point, we only have 9 of these policies pertaining to Microsoft SQL Server virtual machines, and let me just go and choose one, simply add it over here. And as you can see, the process is the same. Let's go back. Okay, so anyhow, whatever policy you choose here to go for, you have to remember one thing. These should be in compliance with your SLAs that the company defines. So it is always good to have them handy, not to break any of those compliances or such. So far, we're talking about the policies that are built in the system. So what about the custom policies? Let's take a look at how we can create a custom policy and how we can use them. So to do so, I will go back to the policy and assignment page, And down here, you see I have something called definitions. I'll click on the definitions, and we're going to look at all the policies that we have again within the policies, and both policy definitions and initiative definitions. And as you can guess, since you are experienced administrators, if I click on the policy definition, I will be able to create a policy over here. At this point, you simply define the location you want the policy to be, then the name for it, then that's your choice, a description for it, and down here you're going to have the JSON code for a policy. The JSON code for the policy usually has the structure of if, then else. So as you can see, if some condition is met, then what to do, and sometimes there is an else. But understanding the JSON coding requirements, you can just code and create your own policy over here. JSON code is very easy to be read, and actually it's very easy to be wrote too, so it is not that difficult to learn how to code in JSON. The syntax is pretty much high level. Just take a look at this. You have a policy rule that actually defines between these two curly braces. So it says if condition that you're going to enter here is not this, then do a field, input this, and then if that doesn't happen, or that is met or not met, whichever you set it over there, then that is going to affect into an audit, which means system is going to log it and it's going to be an audit. You can do parameters, allowed locations, disallowed locations, and so on, so on, so on. You can also import sample policy definitions from GitHub that you're going to need an account for it, but it's going to be a free account, or you can also use your Microsoft Azure account in order to be on GitHub. And there are tons of different policies available on GitHub that you can actually download and use over here. Also, if you remember, and I want to go back one page, when we go to definitions over here, you're going to see a list of available policies on GitHub over here too. So you can import any of these guys from GitHub, and based on the number of developers which are joining GitHub day by day, you should be expecting more policies to be available very soon if you cannot find it over here. So just play with this, excuse me, and go through different types. Like, no custom for me right now. I have to see all the built-ins and everything, but it's very easy to deal with. I recommend any administrator that wants to work with Azure take time and read through these policies. At least be aware of what policies are available out there so that you know what you can do with Azure. Some of them are as simple as enforcing the password complexity, and you already are very familiar with that. The other ones are as complicated as managing the traffic, inbound and outbound traffic, something like what you did on the firewalls on a locally managed computer. So it is always a plus to be aware of most of these policies before you actually start working. At the end of this video, I would like to remind you that there is a huge bit difference between how you manage your subscriptions through Azure policy enforcement, or through the RBAC, or role-based access control that is available to you in the Azure. It is important to understand that basically when you use RBAC, you actually are defining different users with different permissions and authorizations in order to manage and control everything in your Azure subscription, including the policies that we just discussed those. So as you can see here, there are different ways to manage your Azure subscription, either through the web portal or any different type of service management API. You can manage your Azure subscription, which at the end of the day, you're actually using the Azure Active Directory management when it comes to managing Microsoft Azure subscription. You can also use management through certifications, which we're going to discuss it later on, or use the live ID, which is federated to Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Basically, if someone has a Hotmail or a Microsoft Live account, you can use those accounts in order to invite them to interact with your Azure subscription instead of creating an Azure account for those individuals. Um, Role-based access control basically defines and provides fine-grained control over the operation and the scope with which a user can perform on a controlled Azure account. With the resource manager, basically, you can grant permissions at the specific scope to these users. They can only deal with your subscription or with different resource groups or even a specific resource. Um, like what you did in Active Directory on the locally implemented networks, you can also assign a specific fine-grained custom access controls to each user of your networks. There are different roles, and each role has a list of actions and not actions. Basically, what the user is able to do and what the user role is not able to do. So the actions are allowed and the not actions are excluded and they're not allowed for happen. Look at this example. We're talking about a role called contributor. We're going to discuss it in more details later, but for now, understand that within this role, a user can manage everything except the access of the other users. Basically, it's more like a power user in Microsoft Active Directory. When you want to define this, you have to define what are the actions that this user is actually able to conduct. As you can see, we define the actions with a star, which means can create and manage resources of all types. And there are not actions like the user cannot write or cannot delete any of the assigned roles. So if you can see, everything is under the namespace of Microsoft.authorization, which again later on we're going to discuss it in more fine-tuned and fine-grained details over how to set them up, how to bring them in, and how to use them. So let's look at this role owner. So the owner role, which is one of the major roles in the Microsoft Azure account subscription, lets you manage everything, including access to different resources. There is a specific ID for each of these roles that when we go down the road, you see that I put the hexadecimal value over here. This is how Azure understands that, and I'm going to discuss how to use it later down the road. Again, there are an set of actions instead of not actions. So as you can see, there is no not action for the user owner, as this user can create and fully manage all of the types of the resources that you have. And that's where we use the star. If you remember from the search operands or any programming operands, star sits for anything that you don't know the value to, and question marks sits for any character that you don't know the value to. And we are implementing the star the same way over here when we talk about different users in Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Just before we move forward with more resources, let me just take you to where you can actually define the users. So when you look at the control panel or the hub, remember the terminology hub, you can scroll down and get to this icon here, Azure Active Directory. If you click on Azure Active Directory, first of all, you're going to get an overview that is going to help you get us started with special details of the Active Directory. But anyway, generally, and I believe very familiar to you, you have the list of users here that you can manage those with adding a new user or new user group depending on what needs you have. And as you can see, I have two users over here. One of them is my CCSF account that I invited earlier in this video, and the other one is my own Microsoft account that I use for managing this Active Directory domain. Over here, you can delete users, you can reset the passwords for users, or you can go in and set the specific settings like app registrations or administration portal or availability of a specific portal to them. One good thing is if you have users that are supposed to do very minimal activity or settings on your Azure subscription, you can basically go ahead and restrict the access to the administrative portal of Microsoft Azure Active Directory. In this case, they can only use the PowerShell or the CLI, and they're limited to the commands that is actually related to their task that they're supposed to complete or fulfill on your Azure subscription instance. This is a part of security concerns that we're going to discuss later down in this class. The method is called list privileges, and here is one of the ways to implement the list privileges method on different users. You can look at their sign-ins, when was the last time they did sign in and all that. As you can see, my access is denied because I need a premium account in order to be able to do that, but I'm just using this account for the sake of demonstration over here. You can have audit logs and look at what has happened in your Azure account. So especially when you are running an enterprise and you have multiple users who may log into your system, manipulate and change stuff, and cause issues, you can go back there and kind of like trace that down to what is happening. And you have this new support group that you can basically go ahead and request support from Microsoft Azure, which is not a matter right now for us. And then again, look at the horizontal scroll that I can easily do instead of going ahead and jumping between different menus. I can either navigate back from here or simply just scroll back and get to the point that I started from. So going back to users, very simple, very straightforward, exactly like what you remember from the Microsoft Active Directory on the server. And then the other thing that you can do, you can manage your groups. You can manage the organizational relationships, roles, and administrators. You can assign somebody as an administrator, and you can look at how many different roles you have. We're going to discuss all these in more details later down the road. So let's go back to our presentation, and now that we discussed owner, we want to move to contributor. This is one of the more common roles that you assign to the people who work with you in your company as assistant IT managers, and they help you with the specific actions. Again, look at the general idea of how a role is defined. We have an ID, actions, and not actions for specific roles. So the contributor has this hexadecimal ID. Good news is you don't need to memorize that. You can easily get it online from the Azure documentation if need be. So the action again, store, create and manage resources of all types, but then you're excluding these actions from the contributor. So basically, so far for this part, this is the owner. And then in order to turn this owner to a contributor, so basically you go with this part and minimize the amount of access to what you want a contributor be. So as you can see, it can't delete roles and role assignments, so it cannot manage different other users. It can't create roles and role assignments, so not creating a user, not deleting a user. This one, the action scope, grants the color user access administrator access to the tenant scope. So basically they can, with this access that you add here, you define how they can manage your scope. With the right under the Microsoft Blueprint, you are giving them the opportunity to create or update any blueprint artifacts, and so on and so on. So this one way of creating custom roles actually is to move ahead and download any of the already in place roles and go ahead and manipulate their not actions or actions in order to create your own custom roles. Let's move on to another default role. This is a reader role, which lets you view everything but not make any changes. So as the name talks about, it is only a reader. It's somebody who wants to take a look at your account. So sometimes before you provide a service to a company or a subsidiary, you want them to have an option to take a look at the services that are available and the way that you're managing the Azure instance. And this is a good idea to give them the reader role. As you can see, they only have read to read resources of all types, except for secrets. Again, we're going to discuss what secrets are down the road. And for now, those are just parts of your Azure instance that you don't want any reader to be able to look at. So this role will allow someone to look at the properties of a Azure account, like a storage or database account, but they won't be retrieve any access keys, or they won't be able to manipulate it or change it to whatever. So it's a safe one. It's like the guest. There are some other roles like the SQL database contributor, which is a user with um, ability to manage SQL database but not touching the security related policies. You have the SQL security manager, which now can do that. The storage account contributor, virtual machine contributor, and so on and so on. So there are some built-in Microsoft Azure roles that you can find information about those on the documentation that Microsoft Azure provides and updates on a regular basis. So what you need to do is basically you need to go to Microsoft Azure document website and go to Azure slash role based access control. You're gonna land on this page. As you can see, this gets updated more often, and as of now, it is updated at 1/24/2019. Before I move forward, one thing that I want to emphasize is if you're working with Microsoft Azure, you cannot really rely on the textbooks that are available right now, or going to specific websites that provide content regarding Microsoft Azure. If you go back to what Microsoft Azure was looking like in 2015-16 and compare it with what it looks like right now, you're going to see a huge difference between the way the interface is set up, the way different roles are set up, the way different policies are set up. And as I said while talking about the policies, they're getting updated more often. So it is always safe to come to the documentation that Microsoft itself provides about what is going on as of today. And I believe 124 2019 is pretty up to date, considering that today is 27th of the January. It just got updated 3 days ago, and you guys can actually get your information about the role-based access control over here. So the built-in roles that I'm looking at right now, like owner, contributor, and reader, if you click on any of those, it's going to jump to the bottom of the document. So I go from the first one. As you can see over here, you can see the description of the role, the specific ID, the actions that are available to the ID, or like in the contributor one, the not actions that are associated with this specific ID. So we have the reader here, ACR image signer, ACR pull, ACR push, and too many different roles that as of today are available in Microsoft Azure. You can also look at the resource provider operations and see the system actions and system roles actually. Look at the RBAC limits, and so on and so on. So we're going to have a full lecture over authorizations and everything. For now, I just wanted you to have an idea about how role-based access control happens in Microsoft Azure and how different it is from enforcing a policy. Um, so if you're interested in looking at more roles, that's where to go. Go to Microsoft documentation, and then let's talk about, oh, and the link is over here just in case you cannot navigate over there yourselves. You can always come back to this video and look at this link and enter it into your address bar in the browser to get there. So let's talk about the custom roles. So if none of the built-in roles and no combination of the built-in roles provide exactly what you need, of course you can create any custom role yourselves. To my experience, unless you're doing very specific type of data management and information management, you really are not in need of creation of specific custom roles. The other instance, or let's say the other example that you may be in need of creation of custom roles could be when you have a software development project going on and you have different developers in different departments and you want them to have certain level of access to manipulating the resources in Azure to make sure everything is going as planned. Remember one thing, you don't want to overcomplicate your Azure instance. If you have too many users and each user has a specific custom role assigned to them, after a while it's going to be very difficult for your administrator to be able to manage this instance of Azure that you're using. So recommendation is, as far as it is possible, be creative and use the built-in roles. Those are easier to manage. Documentations are provided on those. You're not going to get confused with what you did with specific accounts. And then, even better than that, suggestion is to create user groups and manage through user groups. So if you have very well defined user groups in Microsoft Azure, it is so easy. You just add users to those specific groups or remove them from those specific groups. And that makes your life so easy if you're running a bigger enterprise. So, the way that you can create your own custom roles is either through PowerShell, through the REST API, through the Microsoft Azure portal, or through the CLI. And once you create those custom roles, you can assign them to a specific members of your Microsoft Azure domain or to subscriptions, resource groups, and so on. And then all of those are going to be stored in your Azure Active Directory, and then you can share them across all the subscriptions, which means you can just use and create your subscription user role once and then reuse it in different resource management activities that you may have. Some examples of what you can change or what you can assign or not assign, or permissions to read, write, or execute on different resources like storages, compute resources, network resources, and so on. Creation of the virtual machine, starting or restarting the virtual machine. This is a very common one, but actually you have a virtual machine role already built into the Azure. But let's say you need someone to start or turn off specific virtual machine on your system. You can create a user, remove everything from their authorization, and just leave them with start, restart, or shut down actions on Microsoft virtual machines. And the same way you can create any type of limitation on already in place accounts or the accounts you created from the scratch, or give them specific permissions. Playing with these specific permissions and accesses is like playing Legos and bricks. So you basically have a platform, and on top of the platform, you can put different colors. Let's say black for no and white for yes, and add them up and come up and create the specific customized role that you're interested in having. As you understood so far, best way to create a custom role start point is to just download one of the already in place accounts, work on the account, and create your customized account and save them. After you save them, they're going to be in the Active Directory of your Azure instance, and they're reusable amongst all the resources under the very same account. So these are going to be in the global namespace of your Microsoft Azure account.